All right, we've reached a point in our discussion where we are now talking about lakes. So we've transitioned into freshwater. And when we talk about lakes, we have some similar but different terminology that we're going to use. Now, the location where the water meets the land has the same name. It's called the littoral zone. But in a lake, they instead of talking about pelagic, we had before we had said the epipelagic, mesopelagic, bathypelagic, etc. Instead of talking about that, they use the term they use is limneon. And so the upper water levels in a lake, the area that would be equivalent to a photic zone, would be the epilimnion. And again, so we're going to have phytoplankton there. It's going to be producing energy. It's going to die and it's going to sink to the bottom, just like we had talked about in the oceans. Similarly, oftentimes in a lake, you will have a thermocline where you have the wind that is going to mix the top portions of the water. I mentioned this before. You might have experienced it swimming in a lake. And then below the thermocline, we have that lower level. We only have one level in a lake because they're much shallower than an ocean. And that is called the hypolimnion. So the deeper water in a lake is the hypolimnion. It's below that thermocline. It's going to be much colder than the surface water. Oftentimes, if you think about it, so you have dead stuff. We have all of this plankton and other material that sinks to the bottom, and you have cellular respiration using oxygen. So it's going to be decomposing this material. It uses oxygen, and we don't have any mixing. So where does the oxygen in the ocean come from? It comes from the air, and so we don't have any mixing here. So oftentimes, especially in summer, you're going to have very low oxygen levels in the hypolimnion. Now, just a reminder, cold water is most dense at 4 degrees centigrade. That's about 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So cold, and we had said one of the benefits to water being less dense when it's solid ice is that it will float. So cold water is most dense when it's about 4 degrees. So think about the changing of the seasons. After a hot summer, I'm trying to watch my finger. After a hot summer, we have all of these nutrients down here in the bottom. It's maybe low oxygen conditions, and the air starts to cool. It's fall. And as the air starts to cool, it's going to gradually cool the water in the lake. And as that surface water cools and cools, it eventually becomes most dense at 4 degrees C. And so what's going to happen to that surface water? It's going to sink. So it's going to sink. And so what we're going to have is something that we call the fall turnover. And so the water that was at the surface is going to sink to the bottom. And the water at the bottom, it's cold, but it's not that cold. It's going to move up to the surface. And what's it going to do? It's going to bring nutrients up to the surface. And so what we call this is the fall turnover. And this is when the cold, as winter is approaching, at some point, this surface water becomes more dense than the deep water, and it sinks to the bottom, and the deep water comes to the top, and this is going to bring up nutrients. So it helps provide nutrients to the surface waters.